Good morning. My name is Leslie, and I'm the Marketing and Sales Coordinator at Novalis. And I'm so excited to just be welcoming everyone to today's webinar, Where Do We Find Hope Today? Embracing the Jubilee Year 2025. We have a really full panelist lineup for you today, which is really exciting for me personally, just because I feel like the more voices and perspectives we can get on a topic, the more I think people pull out of it, and also the more questions we can consider, especially when approaching a topic as well. So just a little lineup. I'm gonna read some bios out just so you know who is introducing this topic and why they have the credentials to be talking about hope in today's. And I'm gonna leave them to have about a 35-minute discussion about just their contributions to a recent little Novalis book called The Pocketbook of Hope. And then I'll come back and help moderate some Q&A that you have for the panelists specifically. So the way you can do that as audience members is use the Q&A function at the top. So you can't turn on your camera and you can't write in the chat, but if you write in the Q&A function, I can look through it and engage in the webinar that way. So I don't want to waste too much time. I know we have a few voices to get through. So I'm going to just read a little bit about them, their bios, and I shortened them slightly, but if you want full bios, you can find them on the sign-up link where you registered for this webinar originally. So I'll start with Anne Walsh. So Anne Marie Walsh is a native of St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. She works with the Redemptorists of Canada as a member of the Redemptorist Adult Faith Formation team, and serves on the Secretariat for Evangelization and the Commission for Partnership and Mission for the Redemptorist Province of Canada. She works with the Redemptorists of North America as Coordinator of Partnership and Mission, resourcing and designing formation programs for adults in the Redemptorist charism, spirituality, and mission. Anne is a member of the parish choir at St. Teresa's in St. John's. She is a lover of history and is chair of the Basilica Heritage Foundation. So welcome, Anne.
Thank you, Leslie.
Then going on to Greg Kennedy. Greg Kennedy works as a spiritual director and executive director at the Ignatius Jesuit Center in Guelph, Ontario. The mission of IJC is to cultivate spiritual growth and ecological engagement. This is very close to Greg's own sense of personal vocation. With Novalis, he has published 3 volumes of reupholstered psalms and amazing friendships between animals and saints. He is also the author of an ontology of trash, the disposable and its problematic nature. Although not the first to do so, Greg loves the world. So welcome, Greg.
Thank you.
Moving to Dr. Stephen B. Sharper. He's a professor, author, editor, columnist, and public scholar with a special focus on social justice, sustainability, and the environment. Founding director of the Integrated Sustainability Initiative at Trinity College, he is also associate professor at the School of the Environment and the Department for the Study of Religion at the University of Toronto, as well as the Department of Anthropology. Dr. Sharper's research and teaching are in the areas of environmental ethics, worldviews and ecology, religion and ecology, liberation theology, sustainability ethics, as well as nature in the city. His book that was published with Novalis, For Earth's Sake Toward a Compassionate Ecology, explores the notion of how we are being called to develop a loving relationship with the natural world in light of contemporary ecological challenges. And then finally, I'm going to introduce, if you've been to our webinars recently, you definitely recognize Edward Chateau. But Father Edward Chateau is a priest, Augustinian of the Assumption. Of Russian origin, he lived in France, England, and Romania before coming to Canada. Edward Chateau is passionate about the Word of God, history, literature, theology, and art. He knows the Holy Land well, having visited it several times. In 2020, he published A Russian Pilgrim in the 21st Century by Medicipal Publishing Group. He is the director of the Culture and Faith Center at Montmater in Quebec City. He is a columnist on Radio VM. He also hosts the webinars for Novalis Publishing Group in French. So welcome, everybody. I feel like I need a glass of water after going through all that. So I will leave you to your discussion, and I'll be back in about 35 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Good morning to everyone who attends this webinar. And let me introduce the beginning of our discussion by a very simple question, because we will be entering into the Jubilee Year that has a theme that the Pope Francis, with a committee, suggested to the whole Church, and it will resound for the whole world, the Pilgrims of Hope. Why should we be centered or pay at least a certain attention to the hope in these times? And I think this is why also each one of you, Anne-Marie, Stephen and Greg, you took part in this reflection on hope. So why pay attention to hope? And maybe a little bit question also in this. Is there any difference between hope and optimism? Or this, what we call usually positive thinking? Is there any difference, or it's the same? So, Anne-Marie, do you want to start this conversation?
Sure, I'd love to. For me, there is a difference. I remember reading Václav Havel's words on hope, and he said exactly what you just said, Edward, that there's a difference between hope and optimism. It's not a sunny disposition. Hope is more than that. It's more than a Pollyanna attitude to life. Hope really is founded in the certainty that something is worth doing, that's independent of the outcome, that something is worth doing because it's worth doing. And for me, the experience I often go back to is a very personal one, but I was diagnosed with breast cancer about 6 years ago. And at first I was paralyzed. I really was. I didn't, for a person who always thought she had faith, I found myself paralyzed. But the one smart thing I did, I think that was this dredging up a little kernel of hope from inside, was I called a beloved friend, a Redemptorist friend of mine, and I said, I can't pray. I don't know what to do. I really am paralyzed by this diagnosis. And he said, that's okay. That's why you were baptized, so that in a time like this, the rest of us would carry you. And that gave me hope. He didn't say it's going to turn out well. He didn't say you're going to recover. He didn't say you're going to be cured. He did say you're not alone. And that really gave me a perspective and a strength to go forward.
It's funny what Anne-Marie was saying. So I'm a spiritual director, and often I see part of my job, or a good part of my job, is actually to hold faith when people feel that they don't have it themselves. So when people come and they feel that they're just not able to go on, or just not able to feel good about themselves, I, as the spiritual director, see God working in them, see goodness at work in them, and my job is to hold that when they don't see it themselves. So it's very similar to that kind of hope that sees the good when others find it hard to see the good. And my own sense of, I mean, I live in a contradiction. I would say that I'm very concerned about the ecological state of the world, and I see it as a rather perilous. And I've read many books that talk about the collapse of various civilizations, and some very thoughtful people, very intelligent people, think that we're really on the cusp. And yet, I believe that. I mean, I retain hope even while I'm wide-eyed and see the possibility of vast suffering and change. I don't let that keep me up at night, and I really have hope. And maybe partly that is some of my Ignatian training. So Saint Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, work at the Ignatius Jesuit Center and teach Ignatian spirituality, really thought that we should, and he says this in his principle and foundation, we shouldn't actually want or strive for a long life over a short one, success over failure, because everything has the possibility of drawing us closer to God. I mean, that's a very, very tall order to live by, but what he kind of calls this detachment is not a hopeless kind of sense or resignation. It's actually saying that I have a deep, deep faith that all will be well, in a sense. And to quote Julian of Norwich, again, it's a contradiction, because it can easily, sometimes people would say, well, that's resignation, that's just concession to the hard things in life. But I really see it as a capacity to work without being hung up on the outcomes. I think that's what Anne Marie was trying to get at in this Havel, who worked very, very hard in Czechoslovakia for the freedom of the Czech people. That no matter what, we just have to keep going, because it's not the outcomes, that it's actually the process. And again, what people will find in the Pocketbook of Hope, this is reiterated time and again throughout the many writings, that it's not the success, but our own souls and our own community building towards working towards these hopeful outcomes, even if we don't get them.
Yeah, it looks like Anne-Marie is back. And what I would say, Greg, is it a contradiction or is it a positive, constructive tension?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there is a little difference between, then we say the contradiction, we try to eliminate one or another part. But
That's right.
when we're saying tension, it helps to hold together and one and another part. What I would say, Anne-Marie, what you were saying, that you hold together this reality of being diagnosed with the cancer and very difficult states of mind and body, and at the same time hold this community presence that your friend Redemptorist told you. It was a tension, I think, a perpetual tension. Stephen, do you want to say something? We will try.
Yes, well, give it a whirl here. I'm still getting an echo on my end, but I don't know what's going on. Yeah.
Maybe you can just disconnect or reconnect again. Maybe it's one of the things. We will ask Leslie to look after this and communicate with you.
Okay.
Anne-Marie, taking into account what you were saying, it looks like that hope, that is different from the optimism, it's supposed to not only think or have nice ideas, but also to do something. And I will come later to Greg. Greg, I think this tension, we know the challenges in the world are big, but does it mean we should just wait and say, let's look what will be happening? So Anne-Marie, are we going to do something when we hope?
I think we are. I really believe that, from my experience, hope is both a decision, and also it has to have action. It has to have evidence that others can see and I can see that hope means something. So for me, one of those decisions, one of them that I made in the middle of that, realization that I'm not alone, is, well, then I'm not going to be any nurse's worst patient. And so what I decided was that every time I went in, whether it was for a checkup, whether it was for surgery, recovery, chemo, radiation, any of that, that I was not going to be any nurse's worst patient. And I would look for something positive in each day. And hope never disappointed me. Some might say God never disappointed me, but hope never disappointed. Every time I made that decision consciously, every day when I went to that hospital, there was something positive, something that really spoke to me, a way I could touch somebody else or they could touch me. And I'll give you an example. One was a radiation technician who, when he found out that I worked for a church, he said, "Oh, well, I've had a bad experience with churches." And I could see him turn off. And I said, well, you know what? I'm not going to let you have a bad experience with me. So this is going to be an okay thing. So, and said, and you don't have to, what I want from you is that you do your job well. So I'll be grateful every time you do your job well. And he kind of shook his head. But the next time I came in, he banished the other technician and said, I need to talk to you. I didn't treat you fairly the other day. I realized that my previous experience had really shaped how I thought about people who work for churches. He said, and I realized that that was not a worthy thing for me. And so we sat down and had quite a chat about how we encounter others on the way and how our previous experiences can shape those encounters. That man realized and had to apologize. I take that to be a great sign of hope, that in that encounter, something positive came, that my decision to hope changed his perspective as well as my own. At the end of radiation, often you give a thank you card or something to the technician. When I walked in with my thank you card the last day and rang the bell to say radiation treatment was finished, he actually gave me a bouquet of flowers. And I take that to be a beautiful thing. So hope is a decision. Hope has legs. It is borne out in evidence, but also hope it gives other people energy. Hope is contagious in a way.
Thank you, Mary Greg. What Anne-Marie and even your own reflection will be resounding, and you can tell us what is the actions, the doings of the hope.
Well, Anne-Marie's little story there was really quite beautiful, because so here we have someone who changes their mind and then changes their behavior because they've changed their mind. Anne-Marie allowed this man to think differently, and then therefore he acted differently. So that's rather extraordinary. And obviously it sounded like you didn't push him into this new way of thinking. He had the capacity to look and to question himself, and perhaps by the love that Anne-Marie rather than Anne-Marie could have dismissed him as he kind of dismissed her, but it was that beautiful kind of opening of a space for encounter that happened. And all of a sudden the man is acting very differently. And then this beautiful bouquet at the end. So, I mean, I think, I'm quite convinced that, at the core of our being, we need meaning. Meaning is what really allows us to live well and to live hopefully. And so every single little thing we do can have meaning. And so this little encounter, which it could have gone nowhere. We have a million different encounters each day, but all of a sudden it was infused with meaning, because perhaps that love that opened up a spaciousness. So so that's a little encounter, and then can we multiply that, looking at the meaning of our lives all the time? It's kind of funny. One of the most profound things I've ever read was from Jean-Paul Sartre, famous existential philosopher, atheist, but he said we were never more free than under Nazi occupation. So he was in Paris under Nazi occupation in World War II. And for that, he said, how could you be more free when you're kind of enslaved by occupying force? But it made everything meaningful. So everything was you either kind of go with the darkness, or you kind of fight against it, at least just mentally. I'm not going to let these people, this dark force, this hateful force, decide what I think and how I operate. So again, this is how I can live with the tensions, because I think that no matter how oppressive the current situation is, I have the choice to say, no, I'm not going to go along with that. There's a better way to live. And that gives me meaning. And then every action is a response to that meaning making.
Greg, you brought a very interesting part for this conversation. The meaning, I would rephrase it slightly different. Certainly, we are all facing one or another difficult situation. By the way, sometimes someone who is going through a very serious illness or sickness is behaving more reasonable than someone else who's having a little trouble and panicking in front of this. So we have all our characters, our history, and so we will not just have wonderful idea, but also doing something. But in the name of what? In the name of whom? So because only this in the name of can give you the meaning, the direction. So what would be your reflection? In the name of what, or in the name of whom?
That can be all kinds of things, of course. Again, I go back to Viktor Frankl, the great psychotherapist, who created logotherapy, which is all like, how do we find meaning in our lives? And he would say that the people in the concentration camp that had meaning, that could have been a loved one that they wanted to live for so that we'd see them again. It could be God. It could be just a sheer sense of determination not to be crushed by hate. So, I mean, for me, it's a spiritual, it's God.
But what I hear from what you, Greg, you're saying, every one of us, each one of us, should pause for the moment and just to look very deep down inside and around and say, what are the foundations of my life by which I, like go all the way through and to which I hold very firmly when the life become meaningful and not meaningless.
Yes. And I mean, to bring it back to the Bible, I think a lot about this, and this is, again, one of the aspects of the book that I appreciated so much. There was a lot of talk of courage. And one of the constant refrains of the Bible is, be not afraid. And so, I mean, I think that the choice is, do I live out of fear, or do I live out of courage, hope, love? Ultimately, it seems like there are the two choices. And again, the book reiterates this, that hope is a choice, but love is a choice. So I can either choose to live fearfully, or I can choose to live lovingly. And I mean, for me, love gives meaning, and that is the core. I mean, I can always have something to be afraid of. I'm going to die someday. We all will. But in the meantime, I can love as much as I possibly can. And that for me is, in every single action, is either I can do it out of ever increasing love, or
Anne-Marie, Anne-Marie, I see you want to say something. So
I do. What I hear and what I believe is that hope is a decision, but it's not, for me, a decision that's made just once and it's over and done with. It has to be renewed every single day, but in individual situations and individual encounters. So hope is, yes, a fundamental decision, a fundamental orientation that I choose, but it's also a decision that I have to renew all the time. It is a choice, and it's renewed in each moment or each encounter, each situation. I come from Newfoundland and Labrador, so we're a seafaring people. We live on the ocean, we die on the ocean. It gives us life and it takes life. But what gives me hope is that generations of people here have found meaning, and even more than that, have found joy and purpose living on the ocean. So when I think of my interaction with the environment that I live in, it points to thriving, not just surviving on the side of the ocean, but thriving in this harsh environment, which does not breed harsh people. So I love that what Stephen is saying there about choice, but it's a choice that we make all the time, and I think it's bolstered up by my own experience. But for me, as a historian, it's also bolstered up by my knowledge that generations of people have found meaning and purpose and community in this environment, have chosen this life too.
yeah, and it helps me to introduce and to invite Stephen. I hope you will not be echoing all the time, but to invite you to say, we're talking about the purpose and how we transmit the meaning of life. And in your contribution to the book, and it really struck me when I was reading, you are saying that precisely telling the stories to put each other in connection with each other, in relationship, it's extremely important. And I will quote the phrase with which you open your reflection. For me, hope is embedded in our stories. And this is the saying, the quoting the Anishinaabe artist chief Lady Bird Arama First Nation. So what do you think make us to say that's the purpose of my life? How we discern the purpose, and then we can act with hope.
Well, thank you, Edward. And I had every hope that I was going to rejoin you visually and audibly. So here we are. Thanks for the question, and thanks for the dialogue thus far. I think that for me, stories help cut through a lot of the negative doom and gloom that we experience in environmental studies. And as someone who has to teach environmental studies, where we look at climate chaos, where we look at species loss, where we look at social injustice, it can be a chronicling of despair. And that's why it's important not only to bring in counter data of positive developments, but also stories of personal and social and ecological restoration, and building on your point, Henry, of flourishing. This is not just about, oh, I want a sustainable relationship with my wife. I want a flourishing relationship with my wife. I don't want just a sustainable future in terms of our relationship with the ecological and social systems, but a flourishing one, where all of us can be who the divine calls us to be. We can fire on all cylinders in love, in resilience, in strength, and in empathy. So often when I would look at some of the landscape of where we're at ecologically, I would think of my grandmother, and I include that in the chapter. And my grandmother was a positive person. My dad called her Mirth. He couldn't call her mom because he wasn't her son directly, but he called her Mirth because she brought joy. But this was not a Pollyannish joy. She had survived World War I with her husband in the military. She had survived the Great Depression without much money, raising a family. She had survived World War II with her son lying about his age and going off to the South Pacific. She had survived alcoholism in the family and all these struggles that are concomitant with that. And yet she was joyous. And she always said to us, never underestimate the power of positive thinking, and always trust in the Spirit. Always trust in the Holy Spirit. So for me, hope is definitely different from optimism, as Anne-Marie and others have said, because it's a gift the angels bring. It's one of the cardinal virtues: faith, hope, and love. What it reminds us is, particularly in a Christian tradition, that we do not fly solo through an abandoned world. We are not isolated monads in a desolate cosmos. We are loved. The divine has made the divine presence infleshed, inearthed, rooted in our soil. We never are alone. And for that is a wellspring of hope. We're loved and never abandoned.
And taking this and following our conversation further, you mentioned that your grandmother was always smiling. So she also had a good sense of humor, of joy. Joy is inseparable from hope, like another element, which we will talk a little bit later. But before we move, and I will ask Anne-Marie and and Greg say a few words about joy. Can I ask you to tell the story that you tell in your contribution? We will not tell the whole the contribution, but this scene from the Convocation Hall at the University of Toronto on the spring 2009.
Yes, thank you, Edward. This was when the University of Toronto was giving an honorary doctorate to Jane Goodall. And we know about her amazing work in Tanzania with primates and her establishment of Roots and Shoots. And she was getting this honorary doctorate, and I was asked to read the citation. So we're all in our academic regalia in a very august space, Convocation Hall, over 100 years old, etc.
Serious one. We are all serious.
This is serious. This is a serious Latin-ridden service of pomp and circumstance. So I'm about to step down, and she says, Stephen, I have to thank you the way the chimpanzees would thank you. You have to come back here. So I go back on the stage, and she puts her arms around my frame without touching me. And she said, you have to do this to me. This is not a spectator sport. And she started to go, ooh, 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 ooh. And I had to do the same. And it crescendoed and bounced off the curved dome. And people just started laughing. And she brought joyous, riotous laughter to that staid, august service. And this woman who has seen the ravaging and terrible effects of poaching, of slaughter of these chimps, of ecological destruction, climate change, brought this love, life, and joy to this moment. And for me, that encapsulated the wisdom and humor and grace of someone who knows the score and yet still can bring joy, laughter, and beauty to all spaces and places. So it was a wonderful memory.
And Marie, Greg, what do you think about joy and the place of joy related to hope?
I think there's an integral connection of joy and hope. And joy for me is something deeper than, like deep down, deeper than happiness. It's not a surface thing at all. And again, you have to look to find joy and pull it up from the depths sometimes. But life has a way, God has a way, other people have a way of surprising us. And it's quite amazing. I remember I was walking through a cemetery. I had looked on our diocesan cemetery records to find the grave of one woman who in World War I had been the mother of the Newfoundland Regiment. And I don't think anybody had been to visit her grave since 1935, let's say, just after she died. And I wanted to kind of pay homage to her. So I found her record and I went down to the cemetery with a flower to visit her grave. And as I was walking on the frozen ground, it was March and the ground was still frozen, I heard footsteps behind me. And the cemetery manager was following me down through the graveyard. He had heard me looking for that woman's grave in the office. He heard me tell the administrative assistant a bit of her story, and he wanted to join me in honoring her. He had never known about her until that moment, but it called up in him a response of gratitude, which I think is another key word. Joy and gratitude are deeply related and related to hope. I think they're all kind of linked virtues. But Gordon wanted to come with me to honor May Furlong, who he had never heard tell of, but it had stirred him to gratitude. And so I think that's really important, that hope and joy and gratitude are closely linked.
And I will make another step further or aside or to bring another element, what Greg, you mentioned related to all this. We should have courage. It looks like there is hope, joy, gratitude, but also courage. And, when you mentioned this word, I was thinking, okay, but how you can have courage and joy or joy and courage, then everything looks like doom and gloom.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so glad that you raised the Jane Goodall story, because for me that embodies courage and joy in the same. So she knew the convention. You're not supposed to play a monkey in a convocation. That's not what you do. But she had daring. She threw convention to the wind, and in a totally unself-conscious way, she said, "This is great. Let's have fun." And it was obviously very memorable. And I think, again, it opened people's minds So it doesn't always have to be this way. We don't always have to be bound by our own concepts of what is right and what is proper. And I think laughter and humor actually preys upon that. The reason that humor actually works and jokes actually works because it just destroys our conventional thinking. It turns everything on its head, and that's why we laugh. So joy, courage, hope, gratitude. I mean, again, we smile when we're grateful. They're intricately and irrevocably connected. So it's just a wonderful thing to do. And I mean, I love to smile, and I would hate to find a time where I couldn't smile, and that would be pure defeat for me.
You know, also listening to you and reading you, it looks like then we accept and adopt the position of hope. It brings us energy. It really gives them some strength that maybe we even could not guess that exist inside of us. Is that true, or did I get it wrong looking into your contributions, Anne-Marie?
Oh yeah, I mean, the image I'm having as we speak is almost like constellations in the sky. You know that there are there's a constellation of attributes or strengths maybe that go around hope, that come with hope, that accompany hope. So joy, gratitude, laughter, humor, and even that resilience, that the word that has come up so often, that how to thrive in the midst of hard situations. Um, a memory is coming back to me of my university years, and when I was in my last year at university, the Ocean Ranger went down off the coast of Newfoundland, and so 80 some men were lost, 50 some were Newfoundlanders, and many were people I knew, not all well, but a few friends who were on that rig. And what made us what empowered us to make it through was hope. It was a terrible snowstorm that day, one of our February gales. And even though the university was actually closed, we made our way to the chaplain's office, knowing that Jerry would be in his office, and he was. And there was a little box TV where they were scrolling the names of those who were on the Ranger. And we were sitting on the floor, and gradually the circle around in the office grew, and we spilled out into the hallway, but there was no one walking in the hallway. The university was closed, but we came together. And it was that being together too, the building or the drawing on community, that we had, as Stephen says, a shared story, and we needed to be together in that moment. And that was how we made it through, and then I think eventually thrived. But before you can thrive, I think we do have to live in the sadness, um, the mourning of the moment, and then work through together. But finding community, I think, is a big thing for me in building hope.
Stephen, and you were saying that this energy is also found through the telling the stories, taking care of the nature around. How do you see that?
Well, I see it in a few ways. And Anne-Marie, as you were talking, I was reminded of the great filmmaker Frank Capra, who made the film It's a Wonderful Life. And many will watch that this Christmas season. And his son, Frank Capra Jr., said, "My dad will give you a happy ending, but you have to pay for it." And in that film, as you recall, George Bailey is about to commit suicide. He wishes he was never born. And you see Jimmy Stewart, just back from World War II, suffering from PTSD. He was a pilot on bombers out of England, and he captures something in a violent scene in his family living room that isn't honey sweet. This is not saccharine. This is someone going through tremendous angst and violent anger. And yet the resurrection at the end is all the more joyous because it did not hedge on the desperate horror that this man was experiencing. It's a story that is authentically verifiable and life-giving because it doesn't candy coat the reality. So I think when stories are authentic and come from that space, the joy is luminous and powerful. Secondly, someone who has influenced me and Greg and others probably on this call is Thomas Berry, the Passionist priest who wrote The Dream of the Earth and talked about a new story, a new cosmology in light of our environmental crisis. That we have a story of an evolving universe that kind of came after many of the sacred texts of the world's great religions were crafted. How do we respond to that scientifically, culturally, spiritually? This new story of cosmogenesis. And what does that mean for our social, political, and economic life? So the role of awe in telling that story, the role of mystery, the role of wonder, and the role of ecstatic joy of seeing the beauty of this unfolding universe is part of the narrative that helps lubricate our hopes and our dreams. And I think, and I'm certainly no scientist, but I'm reading material that suggests that when we emit positive energy, it often attracts positive energy. In a sense, if we are listening to the joy and responding to the joy of others and finding that love space in ourselves, that tends to attract similar energies and vibrations from others. Moreover, when we listen to the more than human world, and we try to connect with the life force of energy that is in all forms of life. And Albert Schweitzer, the Nobel Prize winner, doctor, etc., said there's a reverence for life ethic that is necessary because everything has a will to live. And if we relate and listen to the will to live in the more than human world, in the trees, in the turtles, in the birds, in the wild cats, that we are connecting with that positive energy and being fed by it. So that relates to our sense of hope that we are not alone in wanting to have a flourishing future. All the created world shares in that dream.
So what I hear from what you're saying, that we're really going to through, if we accept this path, through the ecological restoration. Greg, how do you see the ecological restoration?
Well, very much as Stephen just described it. One of my favorite quotes from the book is Joe Gunn quotes Pope Francis, who says, "No one can be saved alone." And if heaven doesn't have everyone up there, everyone, and I say everyone, including all the creatures of this earth, I don't really want to be there, to tell you the truth. So in the sense that we're all in this together, and God didn't come just to save me, little old me. God came to save every being, and resurrection is a completely universal phenomenon, or truth. And so, I mean, just to go back to what gives me energy, I mean, and again, Stephen said it well, truth gives me energy. And so anything that is less than truth is less than hope. I mean, because ultimately we just believe that good prevails, love prevails. Again, and it doesn't always look that way, but we got to get to the end of the movie, as they say.
Yeah. So, and this is not the end of our movie, but certainly I would wrap up our conversation as 4 people. And, I will just say one sentence that closes the book and gives a very, true and authentic tone to all reflections in the book. Rejoice in hope, be patient in suffering, persevere in prayer, which is a quote from Romans chapter 12, verse 12. So now Leslie Jane will guide us through the questions and conversation with the participants. And I will wrap up at the end, saying a few words and thanking all of you.
Yeah, I think this conversation has been like so fruitful and like I've had to have a lot of hope during this, just that over the technical difficulties. And I feel like, you know what, we're here now and the conversation, you guys haven't even let these blips like slow you down. And I just really appreciate that. We just have one question in our Q&A function right now, but if anyone in the audience has a question, I would encourage you to write it out now just so we have time to cover it before we end at 11. But this question is Hildegard of Bingen states, hope is the desire of what is not yet and trusting, like a feather on the breath of God. Are people afraid to trust in the present that will empower us to move forward with hope into the future? So I think the question is getting, Edward, maybe you can interpret it too, but I think the question is getting to like, how can we hope today when we know it's a hope for the future? It's not necessarily what we're feeling in the moment.
I think that's right. So, Anne-Marie, Greg, and Stephen, you heard the question, how you receive this question and how it makes an echo in you and what you're going to say. And maybe I will add a few words as well.
You know, I think when I hear Hildegard's image of the feather on the breath of God, that's often it, isn't it? Something beautiful and tenuous and not able to be grasped. Sometimes it needs to be nurtured and looked for and held up on that breath. Um, I think there's truth to that, but there's also a steeliness to hope. And I think sometimes I forget that, but I see it all around me. I see it in, like Stephen's been talking about stories. The folks who've made it through tremendously difficult situations and made it with grace. You know, there's something steely about hope. There's a tenacity. I read one time an image of hope that's, clawed, bleeding fingernails, clinging onto rock, knowing that you know the person will make it. But the image is not of beautiful, genteel things. It's a very sometimes a very raw reality, but that choosing hope is not always that gentle feather on the breath of God, although it can be that. I think sometimes hope is a very tenacious and a very gritty reality. And when we think about ecological hope, that's exactly it. It means that I shouldn't say we, I have to make decisions that matter. I have to make some decisions that will hurt me, not others, I hope, but that are hard in the doing because it's worth it. And that's exactly Václav Havel's idea. I'm never sure I'm saying his name right, but that's exactly it, that it's worth doing. And sometimes it's a very steely, gritty reality and an untidy reality sometimes.
I
Stephen
mean,
or Greg? Yeah, Greg, go ahead.
if I may, because that Anne-Marie just reminded me of a great Zen story in the Buddhist tradition of someone who's running from a tiger, and he jumps off. He comes to the edge of a cliff, and the tiger's coming after him. So he climbs down. He's holding onto a root, and below him he sees a leopard waiting for him to fall, and with jaws wide open. And above him is this tiger. And so he's holding on with dear life, with this tenacity to the root. And out comes a little mouse and starts to gnaw on the root. And he's like, "Uh-oh, I'm toast either way." And then he looks and he sees a little strawberry growing out of the side of the cliff. And he reaches for the strawberry and eats it. And he says, "Oh, how sweet." And that's the story. And then, so, typical Zen story, like you derive your own conclusion, but that living in the moment of joy and awe and gratefulness, he forgot about the imminent death, and yet he was present there. That's what I get from that story, and it kind of gives me hope in that weird kind of paradoxical way that these parables do.
Yeah,
Stephen? Yeah.
thanks, Edward. When I hear that quote, I'm reminded of the idea not only of the pilgrim church, but the nomad church. that we, like the ancient Hebrews, follow a wisp of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. In a sense, there's no end point, the final destination, that we constantly are looking at the signs of the times, paying attention to the winds and the creation that we've been gifted to be part of, and that it means a constant attentiveness, mindfulness, being in the present with all the joys and despondencies there, but it means to be fully alive. And I also think of a quote that my father used to say, and he had been involved as the founding editor of Orbis books that brought liberation theology to North America. And he would say, it's only when we see the invisible that we can attempt the impossible. And to me, that speaks of the feather and the gossamer-like spirit that is sometimes visible and sometimes not.
And, because Leslie, you also asked me to interpret the question. I will not interpret the question, but I will just give a reflection. First thing that came into my mind, it's this image from the C.S. Lewis book, The Silver Chair. Then Eustace and Paul are blown by the breath of the great lion Aslan, and they don't fly at the same speed in the beginning of the book and at the end of the book, and not the same speed. It implies to learn to wait. And our society, and maybe that's our one of the at least big challenges. We don't like waiting. We want everything here and now in 5 seconds. Just look around us in the coffee shops, in the line, in the shops. Let's not take in the lines for the communion. Then I look at the lines to the communion. It's a mess sometimes, just a real mess. And we're all saying that, we're all hospitable and we will give the path to the people, to our brothers and sisters. Not exactly, let's say, but. And another image that comes, to this question, again from the book of C.S. Lewis, in the second book in the series, but in the first, how it was published, and the people know they reached the Lion and the Wardrobe. There is a scene, the marvelous scene, then the beavers welcome for children, and they hear the roaring of Aslan, and that's the image of hope for me. They said, "Oh, who is this?" And they said, "It's a lion." I said, "Oh, is he dangerous?" And the beavers just laugh and say, "Certainly he is dangerous. He's a lion, but he's good." And I think the hope is dangerous because it brings us on the path that we don't want you sometimes to take, or it's a scaring, or Greg, you talk a lot about fear, or we don't want to tell the story, we don't want to make trust, but it's good. Do we have another question?
We don't. So
No, we
I
don't
feel like,
yet.
yeah, I feel
So
like Edward, feel free to go with
I
a
will
question you've
just
got.
wrap up because it's a few minutes left.
Yeah.
I would just say, do you want to say a last word, not the last, but for this webinar? I would ask you one little question, maybe in 1-2 sentences. How does people who hope, believers or non-believers, can help people who apparently lose hope, believers or non-believers? Just a little suggestion.
I might try first.
Yeah, go, Greg.
And it's a practical matter. We need to practice these kind of things. So I'm going to ask everyone to, in the name of joy, hope, gratitude, and humor, to smile with me. No one else, you're only going to see the five of us, but in front of your computer, if you might just smile to the universe and smile to creation and smile to each other, because I like what Stephen was saying, that we're all connected by this energy, and if it's positive energy, let's attract more positive energy. So, and if we'll just smile for a moment.
Thank you, Greg. And Stephen?
Well, thanks, Greg. I mean, I love that exercise because it reminds me of what I was thinking of in relationship to Edward's question, which is let your joy shine, share it. Do not be afraid to profess your joy. And as a professor, I'm asked to profess something. And if I can profess my joy, my hope, and my love, then I think I'm doing my job. And just on the point of smiling, I have a former student and she worked at an intake center for people with disabilities and challenges. And she would smile to people as they came in, etc. And there were some senior citizens there. And when my former student was leaving that facility, this one woman whose name she did not know said, "You have meant the world to me with your smile. Thank you. You have made my space a much richer and happier place." Anonymous, just her smile. So I love the smile and letting our light and joy shine.
And Marie?
I'd have a very similar answer to that. Just to be yourself. Let the joy shine. Let the hope shine. Don't be afraid to tell your story, whether it's by actions or by words. I think it's contagious. I really do think that hope is contagious, and that being aware of that maybe gives us a bit more impetus to be that hope for people who I think maybe more than ever need it today. So just to tell your story, whether it's by your face or your actions or sometimes by your words.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Stephen. I just want to tell everyone of participants of this webinar that, this is a very small pocketbook of hope in which our three guests took part. And it's 78 pages, and you see the pages, they're not very big. It's also published in French. The same book was translated by Novalis into French. I think it's a good reading for the ordinary time, for the Advent time, for the Lent time, for some sharing groups in order to explore hope. And when you three were answering my question, I thought maybe one or another person who are listening to this webinar, and after reading this book, just get 1 or 2 copies and bring it to the school and leave it as a gift, like spread the hope. What Anne-Marie, you were saying, the hope is contagious. So thank you very much for each one of you. It was a real pleasure.